The soul music community simply stopped talking. A generation was defined by D'Angelo's voice. At the age of 51, the man who revived authentic R&B and unadulterated passion has passed away. His death following a silent fight with cancer has shocked the music business and left fans devastated. However, what actually took place behind the scenes? Why was his sickness so secret? What did he say in closing regarding forgiveness, faith, and fame? Stay tuned because the truth of D'Angelo's dying days will shatter your heart and affect the way you never forget him. The music industry came to a halt when it was announced that D'Angelo had died at the age of 51 following a fight with cancer. Celebrities paid their respects, fans flocked to social media, and the industry as a whole lamented the passing of one of the finest soul voices of our time. However, one question stood out above the others as the tributes came flooding in. How did a person who was so profoundly spiritual, so intelligent, and so quiet spend his last years away from the spotlight? The untold tale of D'Angelo's last chapter, his secret battle with disease, the emotional burden of his stardom, and the legacy he leaves behind that will always influence R&B are all explored in depth in this video. You'll learn things that aren't usually included in headlines. The truth about his silent withdrawal from the public eye, his thoughts on atonement, and his final relationships with those closest to him. We'll follow D'Angelo's path from his quick ascent in the late 1990s to his departure from the music industry and the private life he established following his years of notoriety. By the end, you'll see why his voice served as therapy for him and the millions of people who could feel every note he sang. Keep reading because what we learn next about D'Angelo's life, his struggles, and the significance of his quiet may alter your perception of him forever. D'Angelo was a young man from Richmond, Virginia, a preacher's son with a dream and a voice that appeared to come directly from heaven before he developed into the silent, enigmatic legend that we know today. Growing up, D'Angelo was surrounded by gospel music, faith, and the kind of soul that permeates every note you sing. He was born Michael Eugene Archer in 1974. He was enthralled with the music of Stevie Wonder, Prince, and Marvin Gaye from a young age. In addition to influencing his music, those influences laid the groundwork for a whole new era of neo-soul. D'Angelo struck out in the early 1990s when R&B was moving toward a more commercial sound and hip-hop was taking off. His voice had a spiritual quality in addition to being smooth. His lyrics were very human in addition to being romantic. When his first album, Brown Sugar, came out in 1995, it seemed like soul music was coming back into vogue. Lady, Cruisin', and the title track were declarations rather than just hits. Trend following was not D'Angelo's purpose. His purpose was to revive the soul. He was praised by critics as the new Marvin Gaye. D'Angelo, however, had no desire to be compared to anyone. He desired to construct his own lane, a path that blended spirituality, sensuality, and unvarnished truth. And he accomplished just that with Voodoo, his second album, which came out in 2000. It was intensely emotional, enigmatic, and gloomy. Not only did the song Untitled How Does It Feel become popular, but it also became a cultural phenomenon. D'Angelo never meant to become an overnight sex icon, but the music video, in which he stood bare-chested and sang straight into the camera, did just that. Fame was turning into a double-edged sword behind the scenes. D'Angelo was battling the weight of attention, expectations, and the ongoing pressure to live up to the image that others had made for him, while the world witnessed a self-assured superstar. The more people admired him, the more he retreated. In an interview, he once stated, "When people start seeing you as a product instead of a person, that's when it gets dangerous." And that danger was already beginning to materialize, since D'Angelo was starting to feel stuck behind the awards triumph, trapped by his own image, his celebrity, and the suffering of a guy who, despite his internal turmoil, only wanted to create music that helped others. After the release of Voodoo, D'Angelo had the entire music world at his feet. His album achieved platinum status. Critics hailed him as the soul music of the future, and he won Grammys. D'Angelo, however, was at battle with himself behind closed doors. What the world viewed as success, he experienced as suffocation. The same thing that started to destroy him was the celebrity that millions of people had dreamed about. Overnight, he became a symbol of sensuality, thanks to the music video for How Does It Feel, a label that followed him for years. His body, not his artwork, was the reason why fans yelled his name. He had given that song his all in the hopes that listeners would sense its spiritual depth, but instead it turned into a discussion about his persona. D'Angelo acknowledged in interviews how uneasy he felt about that. He had no desire to be the attractive R&B guy. He aspired to be revered as a storyteller, a musician, and a conduit for the holy. As the years passed, the weight of celebrity, expectation, and relentless touring began to take its toll. D'Angelo stepped away from the limelight entirely. Fans thought he had abruptly disappeared. Just silence, no interviews, no new music, no public appearances. There was a storm behind that quiet. As the voice of a generation that wanted him to continue creating masterpieces, D'Angelo was battling melancholy, addiction, and personal issues. He felt conflicted between his popularity and his beliefs. According to those close to him, growing up in the church, he frequently expressed his desire to write music that was healing rather than corrupting. That desire seemed unattainable in a field that prioritizes business and image. Questlove from The Roots, a long-standing collaborator, previously talked about how difficult that time was for him. He regarded D'Angelo as a perfectionist who couldn't bear to release anything that didn't match his spiritual or creative standards. Every note and every song had to have a purpose, and he would prefer to remain silent if it didn't. But silence can be hazardous. Without his music to express his feelings, D'Angelo started to lose his mind. Reports of arrests, drug misuse, and unsuccessful comeback attempts began to appear by the middle of the 2000s. Once referred to as the savior of souls, the man was now consumed by his own suffering. Fans worried if he would ever return, or if the legacy of D'Angelo would end as terribly as so many musical talents before him. Even at his worst moments, D'Angelo continued to write. According to those closest to him, he wrote ideas, prayers, and lyrics in notebooks, as though getting ready for a spiritual rebirth that was not yet visible to the outside world. Then, almost without warning, that rebirth occurred. D'Angelo returned to the spotlight after over 10 years of silence, older, smarter, and able to express something significant. The world had all but given up on ever hearing from D'Angelo again after almost 15 years of quiet. Rumors of a comeback had swirled for years. He was secretly recording, according to some. Some claimed he was permanently done with music. However, D'Angelo published Black Messiah in December 2014 without any prior notice or significant promotion. Neither the necessity nor the power of the timing could have been greater. America was in disarray. Nationwide protests were breaking out as a result of the deaths of Eric Garner and Michael Brown. People were crying out for justice, for equality, for change. Then the Black Messiah showed from out of nowhere, an album that served as a reminder that soul music could still speak truth to power, a musical sermon, and a spiritual protest. The globe was rattled, not merely astonished. D'Angelo's voice had grown. His lyrics were intensely personal, yet unvarnished, and politically provocative. Up till the end, songs like The Charade, Tutu talked about more than just suffering. They represented a generation's collective sorrow and rage. He had stopped singing about seduction and love. He was singing about resistance, redemption, and survival. Many admirers believed that D'Angelo had come back as a prophet, a guy who had vanished into the shadows and then reappeared with insight forged from suffering. Black Messiah was regarded by critics as one of the decade's most significant albums. It was more than music. Listeners were forced to face difficult realities as it served as a mirror held up to society. D'Angelo, however, stayed as private as ever, even as fans rejoiced over his comeback. He rarely made public appearances, avoided social media, and avoided most interviews. Those close to him say he preferred peace over exposure, spirituality over fame. Finally, after years of turmoil, he had discovered equilibrium, or anything near that anyway. However, there were indications that something wasn't quite right even during his return. During live performances, D'Angelo's enthusiasm occasionally faltered. According to onlookers, when he did give interviews, he alluded to emotional and physical fatigue. He spoke of how hard it was to preserve his health and soul in an industry that often drains both. He talked about how meditation, family, and faith had given him comfort. However, something more sinister appeared to be simmering beneath that serene veneer. Nevertheless, he put his all into his songs. His powerful performances, particularly at the Afronk Festival and on Saturday Night Live, where he conveyed sentiments of togetherness and empowerment, are remembered by fans. He didn't seek attention or trends. He was telling the truth. He served as a reminder that being an artist was not about being famous. It had to do with purpose. But by the late 2000s, D'Angelo had started to fade from the spotlight once more. In 2021, he made his final significant public appearance at a virtual Versus battle, an intimate, nearly spiritual performance that moved the audience to tears and nostalgia. Fans took note of his apparent sadness, as though he was aware that this might be his last big appearance. He performed with the same dignity, modesty, and passion that had characterized his career from the beginning. Then there was stillness once more, a spooky, familiar silence. There were rumors and silent worries from people who cared about him, but no new initiatives or public declarations. However, nobody could have predicted that D'Angelo was engaged in his most challenging conflict to date. Behind that silence, the world would be shocked by what transpired next, not because it was unexpected, but because no one ever believed that a man who had given so much soul to the world was silently losing his own fight. He fought cancer, but he kept it a secret till the death. Most fans figured D'Angelo was just taking another long creative hiatus when he vanished from the public eye in the early 2020s. After all, he had a tendency to disappear, think, and then come back with something important. The silence, however, carried a different weight this time. D'Angelo wasn't merely withdrawing for creative reasons. According to rumors circulating in the industry and subtly expressed by individuals close to him, he was battling for his life, which was a much more serious conflict. D'Angelo had received a cancer diagnosis behind the scenes. In typical D'Angelo form, he didn't desire spectacle or compassion, thus the type and stage were never made public. He had avoided the spotlight of stardom his entire career, and now, in his most vulnerable times, he chose privacy once again. The whole truth was only known to a select group of close friends and relatives. They spoke of those last months as both tragic and oddly serene, a time when D'Angelo appeared to have reconciled his legacy, his path, and his hardships. D'Angelo apparently listened to music most of the time when he was receiving treatment. He kept writing and recording little song fragments, melodies about faith, healing, and transcendence, even as his body weakened. He left hours of incomplete stuff behind, according to some. Songs that express his thoughts on life, death, and the pursuit of meaning. To those who were closest to him, music wasn't only his career, it was his lifeblood. It was how he prayed, how he spoke to God, how he made sense of what he had gone through. His loved ones prayed for another miraculous recovery during the times when he appeared to be getting better. However, as the months went by, his health deteriorated. According to reports, he declined to disclose his condition to the public because he did not want his followers to perceive him as the unwell performer. He desired to be known, not for his suffering, but for his courage, his creativity, and his truth. Despite the pain, D'Angelo never allowed bitterness to take root. He frequently reflected on his early years, how far he had come, and how fortunate he felt to have touched so many lives with his voice. According to one close friend, he never complained. He just kept saying, "I'm grateful for the time God gave me." This humility characterized D'Angelo until the very end. According to those who visited him, D'Angelo continued to smile frequently, talk softly about love and grace, and even hum tunes under his breath. In his last days, he reportedly spent time with his family and listened to old gospel records, the same type of music that had influenced him as a child in his father's church. Then, on that fateful day, the news broke the headline, no one ever wanted to read that D'Angelo had died at the age of 51 following a fight with cancer. People all over the world expressed their shock, heartbreak, and gratitude on social media, and musicians from all genres, from pop and jazz to R&B and hip-hop, shared heartfelt tributes, referring to him as one of the most influential musicians of the past 30 years. Questlove posted a simple message. He gave us soul when the world had forgotten what soul meant. Maxwell stated, D'Angelo was light, suffering, and perfection. I was one of the millions that were cured by his music. But D'Angelo's death had a deeper significance than the headlines and memorials. He left behind more than just a collection of songs. Regardless of how noisy the world gets, he left behind a philosophy and a notion that true talent comes from vulnerability, faith, and an unwillingness to compromise who you are. His passing was more than a loss for music. It served a reminder of how uncommon sincerity is now and how potent it is when it does show up. However, one more mystery remained even after his death. D'Angelo was rumored to have taped a farewell message, a number of letters or songs that express his faith, regrets, and life lessons. Some close to him hinted that his estate would release this work in the future. Others claimed that, as he intended, it might stay private. One thing is certain, regardless of the reality, the voice of D'Angelo will always be there. Every musician he influenced, every listener who sought solace in his songs, and every note that serves as a reminder that soul music is more than just sound are all examples of how his spirit endures. It's the truth. But what was that truth? What did D'Angelo genuinely think about fame, life, and the reason he was traveling? Before he made his last bow, what message did he leave for the world? The music community did more than simply lament the death of a legend following D'Angelo's passing. It started to consider what he actually stood for. He was more than just a performer, lyricist, or vocalist. An era that prioritized spirituality over industry glitz, truth over appearance, and depth over popularity was pulsated by D'Angelo. Charts were not intended for his music. It was created with the soul in mind. And that's why, even in death, his voice continues to resound far beyond the confines of time. D'Angelo's life narrative is not one of tragedy. It is a transcendental one. In the end, his journey, which was characterized by hardship, suffering, and self-doubt, became an example of the strength of sincerity. D'Angelo taught us that art does not have to be perfect in order to endure in a world that is fixated on performance and perfection. It must simply be genuine. His writings traced the development of a man looking for meaning in a performance-driven society, from Brown Sugar to Voodoo and ultimately to Black Messiah. Every record was a confession of his body, mind, and soul, much like a diary. His debut sounded like that of a youthful idealist, full of sensuality and optimism. Voodoo was the voice of a soul divided between God and sensuality. Black Messiah was the scream of a prophet, a man who had journeyed through darkness and risen with clarity. Following his passing, the CDs now comprise a trilogy that chronicles his journey from naivete to revelation. His influence extended well beyond music. A generation of artists that dared to be unique were influenced by D'Angelo. Artists such as Frank Ocean, Daniel Caesar, Anderson .Paak, and numerous more have referenced him as an inspiration, demonstrating that vulnerability may have a greater impact than any promotional strategy or production technique. His blend of soul, funk, and gospel transformed contemporary R&B, taking it to new emotional heights while returning it to its origins. What D'Angelo taught us about quiet, however, may be his greatest contribution to our history. He made the decision to take a break when he needed to recover in a field that promotes continuous posting, continuous noise, and constant performance. Despite being misinterpreted at the moment, that decision turned into a silent act of defiance. It demonstrated that preserving your soul is more significant than enhancing your notoriety. It demonstrated how sometimes silence speaks louder than presence. His death also rekindled discussions about privacy, mental health, and the hidden costs of celebrity. Upon revisiting his interviews and lyrics, many followers developed a fresh perspective on his suffering. They understood that his life was more difficult to bear because of the same sensitivity that made his music so lovely. He was a man who experienced things profoundly. His gift and his load were love, anguish, joy, fear, and that emotional honesty. Around the world, people continue to play D'Angelo's music in churches, on street corners, and in studios, not out of nostalgia, but out of respect. Because he wasn't performing while he sang, he was admitting. He was giving a sermon, he was recovering. D'Angelo was asked what he wanted to be remembered for in one of his final interviews. "For the truth in my music, that's all I ever wanted, to tell the truth." He paused, grinned sweetly, and did just that. His truth was conveyed in each chord, word, and pause of his compositions, a reality that endures forever. So today, as admirers light candles, stream his songs, and reflect on his legacy, one thing becomes evident. D'Angelo was more than just a musician. He created meaning. He reminded us that soul is a feeling rather than a genre. When a music hits too deeply, it causes a pain in your chest. It's the tears that fall when a song brings back memories of your true self. And his soul endures despite his passing. In every artist he has influenced, in every heart he has touched, and in every silent moment when his voice floats through a speaker, we are reminded that faith, love, and suffering will always find balance. D'Angelo, the man who gave us soul even as his own was shattering, may you rest in peace. For further in-depth explorations into the lives of the icons who permanently altered music, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this film and wish to preserve the D'Angelo spirit. Because D'Angelo's narrative is more than just a man's story, it tells the tale of what happens when humanity, truth, and music come together.